So hello everybody, welcome to the Adoption UK virtual roundtable on better futures for care experienced young children in post-16 education. And this roundtable is of note because it doesn't feature a table, but I'm very glad we could do it despite the limitations imposed on us by COVID, because this is such a key subject to have an opportunity to discuss. I will be attempting to keep us on time and on topic, but we've got so many big brains in our virtual room that I think the content's going to look after itself. What I'd like to suggest is we do a quick round screen to introduce ourselves, and then I'll just give you a short outline of what we'll do next. So I'm Sue Armstrong-Brown, I'm the CEO of Adoption UK, and I'm an adoptive mother. And I'm going to say people's names because, of course, we can't do a nice clockwise rotation. So, Chloe, would you be happy to just briefly say hello to everybody and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chloe. I'm an adopted teen.
Thank you. And we're going to be hearing more from Chloe a little bit later. Margaret?
Hello, I'm Margaret Mulholland, and I'm the SCN, Special Educational Needs and Inclusion Lead for ASCL. The Association of School and College Leaders. So we generally work with school leaders of all descriptions. And I'm a parent of a 22-year-old with learning difficulties as well.
Thank you. Claire?
Hi all, I work in the Department for Education, specifically in the Further Education COVID-19 Policy Response Team, where I lead on vulnerable learners.
Thank you. Tony?
I'm Tony. I'm a trustee at Adoption UK. I'm an adoptive parent. I'm also adopted myself, and I'm currently writing a book called Lessons from Lockdown, the Educational Legacy of COVID-19. So I'd love to pick up some conversations with some of you, probably after this session. But yeah, really interesting times.
Thank you. Emma?
Really?
Yes.
I lead. Yes, good. I work for the virtual school, AST Virtual School, which covers 3 boroughs: Richmond, Kingston, and Windsor and Maidenhead. It's about 180 schools, and I lead on previously adopted children's education. And I've got a particular interest in how
Emma, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I'm afraid we're struggling with your sound. I hate to suggest this, but if you could turn your video off, we might be able to use your sound channel more to hear you better.
on learning.
Thank you. We'll keep trying with your video off. I do apologise for that, but your sound was a little bit interrupted there. Where are we going next? Becky.
Hi, I'm Becky Brooks. I work at Adoption UK as Education Policy Advisor. I'm an adoptive parent and I'm a former teacher.
Okay. Mary.
I'm Mary Reader. I'm a Senior Researcher at Education Policy Institute in their Social Mobility and Vulnerable Learners team.
Thank you. Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Walton. I work for the Department for Education. I'm on the Education Outcomes team, which concentrates on attainment for looked after and previously looked after children.
Thank you. Eddie.
Hi, yes, so I'm Eddie Playfair. I'm a Senior Policy Manager at the Association of Colleges, which represents English colleges. And I lead on general and applied qualifications, student support, and welfare, amongst other things. I'm a former college principal. I led 2 colleges, one in Leicester and one in East London for many years. I have a daughter who is an adoptive parent, so I have an adopted granddaughter.
Thank you. Toby.
Hi, I'm Toby Perkins. I'm the Shadow Apprenticeships Minister for the Labour Party. I'm also, my daughter is also adopted, and she's also called Chloe. So she has something in common with Chloe on the call. And she is 17, and she's also FE at the moment. So this is obviously an area of very personal interest as well as sort of a professional one.
Thank you. Alison.
Hi, I'm Alison. I work for Adoption UK. I'm also an adoptive mum to a girl who's going to be 14 on Sunday, and so is starting to head down the trajectory towards FE. So I'm very interested in today's conversation.
And David.
My name's David Squires, and I'm the Policy and Government Relations Officer for Adoption UK.
Thank you, David. And we've also got Lauren and Kirsty on the call and observing, so I won't put you on the spot just now. They are colleagues at DFE and wanted to come along to hear the discussions today. You're more than welcome. So just before we get started, then I'm just going to give you a rundown of what we'll do. In a moment, I'll hand over to Becky, who is the author of the report, and she's going to just press it. I'm sure you've all taken some time to look through it. But Becky's going to summarise the key points just so that they're fresh in our minds. We're going to hear from Chloe, who is featured in the report. I'm very grateful to you, Chloe, for your generosity in coming and sharing your own personal experiences with us. And I think they'll really add depth and colour to our understanding. And then I'll go to Toby. Thank you very much for being here to offer your thoughts, and also invite Claire and Chris to provide us with an update from DFE before opening the discussion. I do want to just emphasise that, of course, while we did invite the Minister to attend, obviously the ministerial team at DFE is incredibly busy at the moment and couldn't come along. We're very grateful that Chris and Claire are here, but we do completely understand that you're here to offer us your perspective as policy experts and not engage in any wider defence or positioning or crystal ball gazing about future government directions. We completely understand what you're here and able to offer us, and we're very grateful that you are here. I'm really excited about this conversation. We did wonder about whether we could have it now, but we ended up deciding that actually we must have this conversation now. We're at this unique point in thinking about education. We've had this unprecedented period of school closures, which has never happened before. And we're in the middle of thinking about what that has meant for not only our families, but all families, and starting to understand the range and array of experiences and impacts that has had, ranging from very, very bad impacts where schools were playing a key role in supporting families, to very positive impacts where schools were representing an unmanageable external pressure. And we've got that huge diversity of experience. And I think what everybody is now recognising, and there's a welcome sign that the debate is shifting towards an acknowledgement that there are some lessons that we can take from this period of time and use to improve education going forward as we come out of lockdown. So we ended up taking the view that while this report was written prior to lockdown, its findings need to feed into that thinking about what education will look like going forward. So I'm very grateful that you've all made time in a very busy period to come along and share your thoughts about this. Our interest, of course, centres around the experiences of adopted children in education, but it's much broader than that. Care experienced children share a lot of the issues that adopted children have, and they in turn are just one group of many who are vulnerable and need to be at the heart of education planning. Getting this right post-lockdown for these children will have the most life-changing effect for any cohort of children. Getting education right for the children who've had the hardest starts in life, I know you all agree with this, is the most transformative thing we can do. So it's crucial that we can extract these findings and play them into the debate as we shape education going forward. I could talk a lot more, but I'm not going to. I'm going to limit myself and hand over to Becky, who is going to take us through the findings in the report and then springboard us into the discussion we'll have afterwards. So handing over to you.
Thank you, Sue. I hope you can all see the little presentation that I've put in place for you just to guide us through what I'm going to say. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the Better Futures report, the context of it, and some of the main findings from it, because I know that you will have had a chance to read it already, and I don't want to tell you what you already know. To give some background, we know that education is a priority concern for adoptive families, and they tell us this repeatedly in surveys that we do, and we go out to adoptive families more than once a year to ask them questions about how things are going. The Adoption Barometer last year, which was a survey of over 3,500 adoptive families representing more than 4,000 adopted children, showed that the children that are adopted are significantly more likely to have special educational needs and disabilities, particularly social, emotional and mental health needs. We saw high prevalence of ASD and ADHD, considerably higher than the national average, and we know that adopted and previously looked after young children are at risk of exclusion. When we look at older children, we see that in the 16 to 25 age group, there's a high prevalence of young people accessing mental health services. So 39% of the young people represented in last year's Adoption Barometer had accessed mental health services in that single year. And again, in that year, those represented in the survey were twice as likely to be not in education, employment or training as their peers. So that sets the scene for why it is that we continue to ask adopted parents and adopted people about their experiences of education. It is such a high priority for them. I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining where this comes from, but I think it's important to understand that the context of this is in the adverse childhood experiences that all actually care experience young children have experienced. So we know that adopted young people, 75% of them will have experienced neglect and abuse in their earlier lives. All of them will have experienced the loss of their birth families, and then most likely the loss of one or more foster families after that. And we know that this can have significant long-term impacts both on physiological development, cognitive development, and social and emotional development, and that these impacts don't go away when the child is taken to a new family. So although we can look at children who've been adopted or previously in care and see that they're in a safe family where they're well nurtured and looked after, the impact of the adverse childhood experiences from earlier in their lives continues to be an issue throughout the lifespan. The impact of this, when we ask parents, is that the overwhelming majority of parents believe that the child's adverse experiences have impacted not only their academic attainment, and we know that previously looked after children achieve considerably less well than their peers in statutory examinations. The DFE provide experimental statistics on that, but also on their ability to cope in education socially and emotionally. And the research evidence is really clear that when young people's well-being is catered for and maintained and supported, their motivation and commitment and perseverance in education increases. And so we find that you can have a virtuous circle of well-being and attainment, where young people whose well-being is supported have more resilience to approach their studies, more willing to take risks, more willing to try something difficult. They're then more likely to succeed, and the bonus of that success in itself increases their well-being and future resilience for future tasks. So the difficulty of young people in social and emotional circumstances also has a negative impact on attainment, because when young people's well-being is not supported and they don't feel safe, they're not in a position to learn as we would like them to learn. I could say a lot more about that. I could have spoken for the entire meeting about that, but I'm not going to. It's just to give some background to explain why it was that we came to ask adopted young people and adults about their experiences of further education. The statistics on young people that are NEET and young people that access mental health services are what prompted us to really look more closely at this issue of FE. And not only that, but adoptive parents tell us frequently that this is a particular challenging time in their children's lives, and that access to FE can be very difficult, and that sometimes all the best efforts to ensure that the young people have educational experiences beyond school can fall apart at the point of beginning FE. And we wanted to know more about that, and we wanted to know about it from the perspective of the adopted young people and adults involved. So we surveyed care experience and adopted people aged 16 or over. Actually, all the survey respondents were adopted people. And also we case study interviewed 6 adopted young adults. We wanted to get, in their own words, the details and the depth of their story and be able to put human faces to the statistics that we're so often reporting. Now, Chloe, that you'll hear from later, features in the report. She's actually Anna in the report, if you've had a chance to read that. So you'll already know something of her story. And we found a number of interesting findings, but I'm going to pick out 5 and very briefly run over 5 what I consider to be significant findings from the report. The first one was the strength of feeling of the respondents and the case study interviewees about how difficult they had found their school experiences, that the foundation in their primary and secondary schooling had not set them up to succeed at further and higher education. 91% of under 25s in the survey felt that they needed more support than their peers at school. Interestingly, when we ask adoptive parents that question, 80% think that their child needs more support. So actually adopted young people seem to have a stronger understanding of their need for support than their own parents did. And this was true of young people who had achieved well academically just as much as it was of those young people who had special educational needs or who had struggled academically. And there's a quote here on this slide from one young person: "Because I was classed as academically able, my attachment-based needs were never considered." And it just highlights the importance of supporting young people's well-being, even if their academic attainment is reaching the standard that we might expect. The difficulties that young people experience in school are a contributory factor, I think, to this next statistic. And this came across really clearly in the case studies, that time and time again I spoke to young people who had had such a difficult time through school that when it came to the possibility of 2 more years of education, they didn't really want to do it. One young man told me, "I was just done with it. I was just done with education and done with school, and I just didn't really want to do any more." Now that young man, I think it was Ethan in the report, he did attempt to enrol at college but didn't manage to successfully enrol in any college. He was just overwhelmed by what was on offer. And in fact, more than half of the young people in the survey said they didn't actually want to stay on at college after they finished their GCSEs at 16. So we're bringing into further education a cohort of people who have struggled at school, who may have felt that they've lacked the support that they've needed, and unfortunately in quite a lot of cases don't necessarily want to be there and don't have a clear idea about what they want to do. When we asked young people why they had chosen the courses they'd chosen, the majority of them didn't choose a course that was based on their career aspirations or goals. They chose a course that was based on expediency, or their friends were doing it, or it was the only one that was available to them. The second issue that arises is to do with choosing and applying. So the majority of young people felt that they needed a lot of support to choose a course, and they needed a lot of support to apply for that course, and that the support that they needed wasn't necessarily there. One mum spoke to us about how her son, because he had special educational needs, got additional career support. But it didn't help, because although the career support person was excellent and very good, the range of courses on offer were pretty much the same everywhere, and none of them were suitable for her son. So even though the careers advice was offered, the range of courses, and importantly the range of settings, is not always available for young people to make a choice that would really be suitable for them. And when I speak about settings, and we will talk about the experience of being at college in a moment, there's a huge challenge for young people transitioning from a secondary school where they're probably known and where they probably know most people, to a large impersonal college setting, which might be enormously geographically widespread, lots of buildings to contend with, lots of open spaces, lots of unstructured time to deal with. So it's not only the range of courses that were difficult to navigate, it was also finding a setting where the young person felt that they could settle in and feel like they belonged to part of the college community. So yes, coping with college life was a significant challenge. More than half of all survey respondents of all ages said that they found the college environment overwhelming and even threatening. They spoke about problems with hypervigilance, that there was a lot of noise and hustle and bustle, and this was very distracting and actually frightening. One of our case studies, Sarah, who went to a grammar school and was very academically able and actually did go on to higher education and become a graduate, she spoke about in her early experience at college of witnessing a fight in the canteen, which absolutely terrified her, because it brought back very clear memories of things that had happened in her early childhood. And she spoke very movingly about how difficult it was to find the right support when academically she was able, but socially and emotionally she wasn't really coping with the college environment. So coping with college life is a significant factor. And we'll see from this graphic that there is quite a difference in approach between those who enrolled straight from school, who were in orange, we're calling them early enrollers. So these are young people who enrolled as soon as they finished the GCSEs, they went straight into college or sixth form. and then those in purple who enrolled more than a year after finishing school. And you'll see that those who came to college later, and some of those had tried once and then come back to it, but those who came to college later just in general had more confidence and more positivity about approaching the college experience. And this is particularly noticeable in the statistics about whether they found the college environment overwhelming. The younger enrollers who enrolled straight from school were significantly more likely to find the college environment overwhelming for them, whereas those who came to it later in life were much more able to cope with that college environment. And I think that's something that needs to be taken into account. The age and the developmental stage of the young people that are arriving at college. We may expect a certain level of independence and maturity that, because of their difficult start in life, they may not be developmentally ready to show us yet. But given time, they will be ready. And I think it's extremely interesting that of those who were older than 25 when they completed the survey, 80% of them had gone on to complete university education. So those people who are reflecting so poignantly on how difficult school and college were eventually did go on to be what we would call successes of the education system, but their route to that was often much longer and much more circuitous than it might be for other people. Fourthly, I wanted to talk about personal challenges. I think this is really important. I think it's well recognised that young people that we categorise as care leavers will have a range of significant personal challenges, and there is support in place for that. I think for previously looked after children, whatever the legal status is, that may not be quite so well recognised. So 2/3 of all survey respondents of all ages said that they felt they had things going on in their lives that made it difficult for them to commit to their studies while at further education. One young woman told us about how she became a kinship carer for her relative's child. We see that young people are at this time coming to terms with a complex life history. It may be a time when they begin therapy on a new level. Our case study, Sarah, spoke about how she had therapy every Monday and she felt continually under pressure to explain why she wasn't in college on Monday and she didn't want to tell people about it. We know from research that the teenage years is the time when it's most likely that adopted and previously looked after young people will make contact with their family members that they may not have seen or had any contact with since they were very, very young. Several of our respondents spoke quite movingly about that. We also know that that mental health difficulties and mental health challenges can become more prevalent in this age group. Not only are these young people experiencing the challenges that adolescence brings, but they're experiencing it with additional layers of complex life history, managing the impact of trauma, maybe undergoing therapy. And this is at a time when young people are transitioning from services that are aimed at children and adolescents to services that are aimed at adults. And sometimes young people can fall through the gaps when the thresholds for these services are quite different. So at a time when young people perhaps need more support than they've ever needed before, unfortunately, sometimes the support that used to be available to them is beginning to drop off and is no longer available. And finally, to mention support, this is a really important theme that came out of what the young people and adults said, was the difficulties that they had in accessing the support. So first of all, whether there was any relevant support available to them, they weren't always clear on that. And second of all, how they would go about accessing that support. A lot of young people spoke about the difficulty that they had in being proactive themselves to go and ask an adult, maybe a stranger, for help with mental health or social and emotional issues. This was difficult and delicate and sensitive. And more than one respondent spoke about how important they thought it would have been to have had an adult proactively seeking to support them, rather than them being in the position of having to proactively seek out that support from another adult. There's also a question around whether some young people are ready for the independence that college life expects of them. A couple of respondents spoke about how their parents wanted to be more supportive, but the attitude of the college was more like, well, you are young people that are going towards independence and we prefer to deal with you on that level. And some of the young people were not ready for that level of independence, actually, and found that very difficult. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that of all ages, there were quite a few comments from adopted young people saying that they were not confident that it was safe to reveal their adoptive status, that they were not confident that people would react positively to that. And actually, we know from surveying younger adopted people in previous studies, you'll find this in our report Bridging the Gap, that a considerable number of adopted children, more than half, experience bullying or teasing at school related to their adoptive status. So this can have a long-term legacy that they concerned about it, and telling people what their status is and seeking help on the basis of that. What's the net result of this? Well, of those who completed our survey, 30% who enrolled within 1 year did not complete their college course, which is a huge dropout rate and a terrible, terrible missed opportunity. When we look at those more confident, slightly older adopted people who enrolled more than 1 year after finishing school, the dropout rate was down to 18%. So we can see that a lot of changes are taking place in young people's lives during this time. And certainly given more time and more opportunity, some young people are more able to make a success of further education. I'm going to leave you with a summary of the survey recommendations. Really, they cover the main things that I've spoken about. We need to try to lay good foundations in schools to give young people the very best chance of arriving at further education, both academically and socially and emotionally supported, to be able to take up the opportunity that's on offer. We need to think about how we're transitioning young people to further education and what the range of options are for them, if there really are a range of suitable options for all young people to access further education and training. We need to speak about mandatory training in relevant areas for staff members, and the possibility of some kind of designated support system that proactively seeks to support young people rather than expecting them to seek out the support themselves. And finally, really, I've brought you a survey of adopted young people, and this is a glimpse into the lives and the experiences that they wanted to share with us. But actually, we need quality data to understand what the real picture is and to drive improvement. And so in the same way that we've begun to collect data at school level, which is proving extremely valuable, we would look to want to collect that same data at further education level and beyond, so that we can understand the real picture of what's happening with previously looked after and adopted children, and ensure that any policy decisions made going forward are based on the reality of what's happening out there. And I want to just leave on a positive note. There is much that was good about what young people had to say. Many particularly highlighted supportive tutors that went above and beyond, and that really made the difference between them dropping out of the course and actually staying the course. And there's a little quote from one here: "The tutors really helped to get me through and pass the course even when I was very anxious." And so much of what is important is rooted in the relationships between the young people and those who will teach and support them. And that kind of stuff costs nothing, and it makes an enormous difference in the lives of young people. Thank you. Sue.
Thanks very much, Becky. That was brilliant, as always. Really helpful to have it all laid out in front of us again. So thank you for that. I know that loads of people are going to have comments and questions, but can I just ask you to hold on to them for a minute, because I really want to go to Chloe now, who's going to take us out of the academic research and numbers and into the reality of what it's like to be one of these young people going through FE. So Chloe, will you give us 5 minutes of your experiences so that we can all really understand a bit more about what it's like?
So I think from my personal experience, primary school was very good. I got lots of support. I felt like I was really understood, and people were listening to the fact that things weren't always easy for me. But then when it got to leaving primary school and sort of going into a new world of high school, it was very different to primary school. And when I was applying for high schools and things, I requested that when I started that I could be in a form with people I knew, because there was only one person from my previous school that was going to be going to the same high school as me. And I was told that I would be in the same form as she was, but that didn't happen, which was really hard because I didn't know anybody else at the school. I only knew her, and we were kind of transitioning a bit together, which I thought, oh, this will be good, it'll really help. But everything that the high school promised and said, we will do this to support you, didn't happen. And from the first day of high school, things kind of gradually got worse. I did sort of kept on persevering and saying I'm not, like, I tried to sort of go in and face the challenges, but I didn't really feel like anybody was listening. I mean, I got bullied on my first day of high school, and I told one of my teachers that I was being bullied, and I was told it's just first day bullying, it will stop, it's just normal. But from there on, the bullying kind of just got worse. So as I kind of went through year 7, I was sort of trying to manage how I felt and kept on going in, trying to put a brave face on it that I was okay, until it got to a point that, because nobody was listening to how I felt and the fact that I was still being bullied, I was kept on being told it'll stop. And that's when I started to self-harm, as a way of coping with how I felt, because nobody was actually taking on board, this is how it is, this is how, how challenging it is. And I never thought, as I was only 11 at the time, that I would self-harm. I never really knew that it was like something that people did. But, that got worse. Then I got signed off sick with stress, and I think I was in about year 8, when I was in year 8. And it was kind of, getting more to that crucial time of high school. So when I did get signed off sick with stress by CAMS, because I was sort of, when I was in and out of their service a lot, and I was off more than 3 months of school, and because I'd already missed school when I was younger, I was really scared that this is going to impact me a lot, because I wanted to learn, I wanted to sort of be normal, and people knew I was adopted, and that didn't bother me because it was part of my life, and I didn't mind that, it was part of me. And being off for a long time was really hard because the bullying didn't stop. I was still being bullied online, and the school weren't doing anything about it, even though it was from pupils at the school that were doing it, which didn't help. And then when I finally got to start a new school, I was really excited. I was really sort of, let's do this, this is my new chance. Nobody knew me at the school, so this will be great because nobody will know my past or what I'd been through, and sort of nobody could judge me anymore from where I'd previously been judged for the self-harm. And when I started, I thought, okay, this is going to work, and I'd have the support that I needed. But the Senko didn't really want to understand either my problems, and I was told that I was meant to see her every week, and I tried to see her, I tried to talk to her about my difficulties, about the anxiety and the self-harm, but she just wasn't listening. I didn't feel understood. I was really scared to admit if something was wrong. And it was a very small school, so there was less than 100 students there, ranging from nursery age children right up to sixth form. So I thought, okay, yes, this is a small school, I'm going to be listened to and I'm going to be understood. But I wasn't understood. I was given a support person, and she didn't understand either. And And then as it got to me starting year 10, I thought, okay, this is big now, this is my GCSEs. And to me, my GCSEs were everything. I really wanted to do them. I kind of wanted to prove to people that although mentally I wasn't okay, I could still do it. And I didn't want to stop myself from going to school and doing what I wanted to do. I had to eventually leave the school, and I never got to do I did one GCSE, and that was my GCSE English Literature. And during my exam sort of time, I was really anxious, self-harming a lot, doing risky things that I'd done previously that I didn't want to do, but I didn't really feel like I had a choice apart from to act out on how I felt inside. But I was told that I was being bad, I was misbehaving, but me attention seeking, but me self-harming wasn't because I wanted attention as such. It was the only way I could get people to listen, because the physical pain I could deal with, but the actual mental health side of it I couldn't deal with. So by doing it, people could see there was physically something wrong, and they could sort of deal with that, whereas the mental side they couldn't. And I was really needing the support that I didn't get. And then when it did come to the exam, I wasn't very well mentally at that time, but I did do the exam. But the first one I did was very tricky and stressful. Didn't have support. I was on my own with someone observing me because I couldn't cope with being in the hall with everyone else, which, that was good. I thought this will be good, at least I'm on my own. But my English teacher actually came into the room where I was doing my exam and said to the person observing me, she's going to struggle with that question, which put me off a lot, really made me doubt myself. And I didn't really do as much as I wanted to do. I did do the exam and I came out with a grade 3, which I was really frustrated by, because I really just wanted a 4 because that was a pass. And I saw people how happy they were when they passed their exam. But while I was preparing for my GCSE, I wasn't in school to do it. I was teaching myself at home because I couldn't cope with the environment of school. And to teach yourself, yeah. So then when it got to year 11 and it was closer to that time of the exam, it was really, really hard. And I was being pressured a lot to come back into school full time. And for me to do full time of school was tricky because obviously 5 days a week's hard. But considering for me, my day would start at around 8:30. So I was on the school bus for 8:30-ish, and then got home at 4:30, which is a long day in itself. But then to deal with the pressures of bullying, the stress of people not understanding that, it was hard and I did want to learn and I did want to do it. The school then decided I could come in on a reduced timetable and just do the core subjects that I wanted to do. So, which helped a lot because it helped at first. But then in year 11, the head teacher changed his mind and said, you must come in full time. But mentally, I couldn't do that. It was hard enough coming in on a reduced timetable, but to then go to a full timetable, it just wasn't going to work for me. And then when I was visited at home by an educational psychologist. Yeah, I was visited by an educational psychologist team leader person he was very, very helpful and said to me, what would be your golden ticket? What would you want to do? And I said that I wanted to start college because I didn't want to go back to school. I refused to go back to school, and I'm glad I did, because school was not for me. School wasn't something that I enjoyed. I wanted to learn, but I couldn't because I wasn't okay enough to learn. I wasn't being listened to at all. So when I did actually start college, I was really impressed. I got a lot of support, which I was shocked about because I'd never been supported properly before. And when I started, I felt really good. I felt, oh, this is working. And then, you know, as it sort of got week by week, the first week was a bit up and down. Yeah, I was quite settled for the first sort of term and a half of college. I was doing a level 1 course, which they don't do anymore, but which was really helpful because it kind of gave me a chance to get used to what college life was like and what other people were like. But when it came to the last sort of few terms of college, I began to really struggle, especially in December time. For me, I think because of my trauma and my past experiences before I was adopted, I couldn't cope very well with the whole sort of Christmas scenario, because it was very family orientated. It was very stressful. So then going back to college in January was really tricky, which then resulted in me ended up in an adolescent mental health unit because of how distressed, how manic my feelings were, and I was taking a lot of risks in December. I was in and out of A&E I was in every couple of weeks, well, a few times a week, which was tricky. But when I was in the unit,
Chloe?
Sorry.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, it's Sue here. I'm just conscious of time because I know that Toby needs to leave us at 12 and we're going to hear from him too. So I'm going to ask you to give us a if you can do this. This is quite a difficult thing to ask you to do. Can you give us a 1-sentence summary of your overall thoughts about college? How did it turn out in the end? Everyone's got your section in the report as well, so I know everyone's read that carefully. But I think what people would really like to hear from you is how you felt about it all at the end.
At the end, it was very tricky. It didn't go to plan, really. I did pass the course, which I was pleased with, but I was told not to enrol onto the course I wanted to do, which resulted in me being neat for a while. So I've been having home tuition since then. So while I have been off college, which isn't really what I wanted at first, I've been taking my GCSEs. So I've been doing my level 2 functional skills stuff, and maths and English. And I've also been doing my GCSE English, literature and language. So by September, I'm hoping, cross fingers, I should go back to college and have 2 GCSEs, which I've never had before, which will be really great for the college to see that actually I can do it and I can cope.
We're really cheering you on. So that's tremendous that you've got to this point. You won't have seen this because you have been giving us your speech, but I'm just going to share a couple of the things that people have been putting on chat while you've been talking, so you know what they've said. I'm really impressed with your speech. This is from Toby. You're providing a very good explanation of what it was like for you and how much more schools should do to help adopted children. People have said thank you very much for sharing your experience, and Tony said the depth and thoughtfulness with which you share your story is inspiring. It tells us just how much the education system has let you down. So you can read those in more detail later, but you've absolutely demonstrated the number of opportunities that that could have been taken to set you up well for further education, and then what could have happened while you were there. So your story's not over yet, and you are starting with such a lot of vigour and openness and honesty, and your generosity and sharing as you go is going to help lots of other people who are coming along behind you. So thank you very, very much for that. It may be that some people will have some questions for you as well when we get into the discussion phase, but thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to turn now to Toby, who is professionally and personally interested in this whole area, and you very kindly agreed to share your thoughts as an initial kickstart for the debate.
Great, well thank you very much, and thanks both to Becky for the report. I think it's a really valuable one. And also to Chloe for that brilliant speech, which really kind of gives a very personal understanding of many of the issues that Becky has highlighted in the report. So thank you to both of them for that work. I'm sure we've all got a lot from that. And thanks also for the invitation to come along and speak at the launch of this report, because I think it is an incredibly important one, and it is very informative to hear from Chloe, but also to hear about how Chloe's experiences are borne out by so many other people in terms of so many other adopted people and their families. As the report sets out, the research has been carried out and the recommendations drawn up prior to coronavirus. If anything, the coronavirus crisis only makes the report all the more relevant and important, because it's going to add further pressures to the system. It's going to add further competitiveness for young people in the workplace. It's going to make it all the more difficult for young people to get on, and the pressures that are going to be on the further education system mean that the kinds of things that we've just heard from Chloe are out the way in which some people's needs get overlooked is only going to be more likely to happen. So I think that it was absolutely the right decision to publish it at this time, but it only expands the power of its findings that it is in the current context. I think that coronavirus and its impact have shone a spotlight on the attainment gap and how the education system is clearly not doing enough to enhance life chances for the most disadvantaged in our society. Now, whilst my specific areas of responsibility around FE, I do think that my own experiences and my own interest in adoption does mean that the need for there to be a presumption that additional support is needed for adopted children and their families, rather than waiting them to identify, waiting to struggle first, and then look to try and provide any sticking plasters is really important. It's something that I'll be very much feeding into the Labour Party's policy response to all of these areas. I was very struck by the case studies of all of the adopted young people in the report and the similar themes of their experiences that Chloe's testimony just now has only underlined. And as the report illustrates, the more likely to be excluded from school, the more likely to miss significant periods of time at school, more likely to have special educational needs and require mental health support, I think that the point in Becky's presentation about those personal challenges obscuring their ability to learn was incredibly important and well found. It's clear that more support needs to be put in place much earlier in adopted people's education journey to prevent such a high number of adopted young people from failing to fulfil their potential. And it's also imperative that there must be a greater range of further education options open to adopted and care experienced young people. Again, I think what Becky was saying about the majority of young people didn't want to be carrying on their education. They didn't want to be there. They were often doing courses they didn't really want to do, but felt that either they'd done the thing that was the easiest, or that they'd got a few options. And again, I think that clearly is going to prevent those young people maximising their potential. So I think expanding the options available is incredibly important. And I think the importance of career guidance was highlighted in the report. Many young people and their parents unsure where to turn to for information and support. I think scrapping of the connection service has been incredibly damaging. And I mean, it's no consolation that the government have finally sort of implicitly acknowledged how catastrophic their destruction of kids' advice back in 2010, 2011 was, by the fact they're now announcing they're going to try and put systems in place to offer that support that an entire generation have missed out on. And I think careers guidance is incredibly important to tackling the attainment gap, because people from more deprived environments are less likely to have the advice that more that people from more comfortable environments were able to take for granted. And I was shocked in reading the report the extent to which it exposed the lack of support offered to adopted students who made their adopted status known to their FE institution, and the recommendation made in the report of the importance of FE providers liaising with schools and with parents of adopted and care experienced young people was something I totally agree with. And you know, I often see further education as the sector of second chances, and the need for a second chance is featured very strongly throughout the report, and that was echoed by the testimony of the young people who were interviewed themselves. It should never be too late to learn, and it is, you know, a really important part of Labour's commitment, that there is a commitment to lifelong learning and to tackling the massive cuts that we've seen in adult education. And again, I think coronavirus only reinforces that need for adult education investment, and that's something that we'll be focusing very strongly on, because I think it is vital both to the economic prospects of individuals, also to our recovery as a nation. I think I mean, I've mentioned 2 or 3 things in the report already that I think I'm really going to take away from that. But I think that lack of excitement about further education, and the sense that education was a chore rather than an exciting opportunity for many adopted young people, is incredibly important. And the need for further education institutions proactively check up on their adopted students rather than to wait for a problem to identify itself, I think is incredibly important. But all of those conclusions Becky came to at the end of her report, I would entirely endorse, and will very much inform what I'm saying about this whole area going forward. And the report also references work being done in Scotland, which I'll be investigating further, because I think it would be very interesting to see the impact that's having on the lives of adopted and care experienced young people. So I'm unfortunately not going to be able to hear much more from the people who are on, But Lindsay Kell from my office is also on the call, and she will stay on for a bit longer to take notes about further things that are being said in response to that report. But the report is an incredibly important and good one. It's one that I'm very grateful to have heard from. And just say once again, thank you, Chloe, also for your perspective, because I think it will really inform everyone and will make a real difference to the way that we think out policy in this area. And so, you know, your bravery and strength in speaking up about your experiences will make a lot of difference for other young people in the future.
Thanks very much, Toby. I'm very grateful that you did make the time to join us and for your thoughts. Thanks in particular for your endorsement of the recommendations, which is very important. So I'm grateful for that, and we'll obviously continue this conversation with you over the next coming weeks and months. Now I'm going to open us up to a conversation. I know that a couple of people have said they want to come in. I just want to check with Chris and Claire. Do you want to feed in? I know you're going to be able to clarify policy currently standing in DFE and give us any information that you're holding. Do you want to comment now with an update, or do you want to feed into the discussion as it goes on?
I'm happy either way, Claire. I don't know if you have any preference. I mean, one thing I'd be happy to do, I was going to give kind of a general talk about update on some of the stuff we've been doing generally for in schools for vulnerable children, and Claire's going to talk a little bit more about further education. I could either give a brief update, or I'd be happy equally to put something in writing and to send to Adoption UK to you know, that you could share with your members. I'm mindful of time, but equally I'm happy with.
We'll have that definitely. And we'll also have the update. Can I just check, Tony, if you want to come in with a particular response to Toby's intervention, or if it's starting the debate more broadly?
Yeah, well, I wanted to say really three things that I think are really, I hope resonate. First of all, Toby, this is one of a body of reports and a body of work that Becky's been undertaking for Adoption UK. And I would urge anyone in the room who's involved in policy shaping or policy influencing, don't just read this report, read the body of reports, or have your colleagues read them, because you know, it's been an incredible, I think, growth for Adoption UK. But we don't own, as a community, we don't own trauma, we don't own care. And I think there's so much to learn from Becky's reports, not just for adopted children and adopted families, but for many other young people who have difficulty in the system. But the point I kind of wanted to make is it's a little bit of a hobby horse, okay? But what's always distinctive for me about the adoptive community is that the way the adoption process works is that you pretty much have to be signed off as fairly middle class in terms of circumstances and all of that to adopt. Now, given that you then find a middle class group who are 20 times more likely to be excluded from school, who achieve half as much at the end of primary and the end of secondary as their peers, this is the massive underachievement of, and in many ways, materially advantaged socioeconomic group. Now, as someone who's an educational sociologist by background, that's unheard of. That's completely, you know, what would our young people, what position would they be in if they didn't have the advantages they have? And I think that tells you the impact of those early childhood experiences, but it also tells you the just how deep the isolation of the isolation of adopted young people can be, in spite of a range of advantages that typically set children up for success. So that's just one thing. The second thing, and I will stop here, is that I think within all of this, we also have to address the whole issue of the status of FE. We can't keep merely retaining it as the second chance sector. You know, it has an identity and a purpose in its own. We can't simply have vocational ed that children and young people fall onto because they've failed at academic ed. And we have to address that range of things, because actually we don't just want our young people succeeding in FE. We want FE to be a great place to succeed in. And I don't know quite how we do those together, but I think we need to do those two jobs together. Because actually, if we don't address the status and the importance of FE, then actually, why would we be steering young people into it? Right?
Thank you, Tony.
I just leave that out there.
Thank you. And I think some of these are things we'll pick up. Eddie's had to leave us. He had to leave at 12 as well. But he has come on the chat to offer to host a roundtable with college leaders and practitioners to discuss the findings and develop practitioners to promote best practice. So we will obviously be biting his hand off to do that. That's a very good offer. And Emma, who you recall was having trouble with sound, has come on to say, so a piece of really welcome good practice at the virtual school where she works. The full-time careers advisor for looked after young people is in post and is an adoptive parent. And she's pointing out that the funding comes from looked after young people. And if it wasn't for that, there would be, this resource for young people wouldn't be, adopted people wouldn't be available. So I think the resilience of the support networks needs to be something that's also examined very closely. So some really good points coming through. Right, Claire, were you going to give us a little DFE pressy, and then we will have a free-for-all?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for inviting us to come today. I really appreciated the time to listen to more about the really, really important and valuable findings from the Better Future report. And I echo everyone else's comments to say thank you to Chloe for speaking so honestly and thoughtfully about your experiences. I just wanted to take this opportunity to flag some of the work we're doing in the further education space that I think chimes with some of the themes that we've already talked about, such as the risk of learners becoming NEET, additional support for vulnerable learners, and mental health. Firstly, to touch upon attendance. In further education, we have prioritised the attendance of vulnerable young people, and we recognise that colleges, providers and other stakeholders have worked harder than ever to support this group of young people since March this year, both through opening up education settings for vulnerable learners and for providing additional support at home. We're really grateful for that, and we've asked providers to continue to work in this way until September, when we're asking all young people to resume their place in education settings. We're continuing to work closely with providers to understand any barriers to attendance. Over the summer, we know that providers will be focusing on new starters and returning learners into settings in September. So we're working with providers and local authorities to collect case studies about some of the really innovative and exciting steps being taken to support young people who are joining or returning to further education, and especially to try and reduce the risk of learners becoming NEET. We're hoping to share that as a toolkit and a collection of case studies from colleges and local authorities to help providers to learn from each other's emerging practices. We've also worked with the National Citizen Service to develop their new summer support offer for 16 to 17-year-olds. It was announced last week that FE providers and schools will be offered a menu of NCS activities over 2 to 10 days, which can be tailored to support existing college summer or autumn activities, as well as the existing autumn offer of 2 to 5 days of support that could take place in the September half term. That support will be free to FE providers and schools, and we're hoping it will help to bridge that gap between the summer and the autumn term. I wanted to touch briefly on mental health as well. We know that this period will have resulted in increased anxiety for many learners and staff members, particularly during the transition period. The government has announced £9 million for mental health charities, including Young Minds, the Samaritans and Bipolar UK. But we've also tried to make it really clear in the existing FE guidance that providers should work to identify young people that might need additional support, particularly vulnerable young people that are likely to need need additional support and make sure that support is in place. And we have worked to try and signpost to a series of high quality existing resources that can be used to help promote and support mental health wellbeing, as well as putting some webinars in place to try and share best practice and expectations around mental health for schools and FE providers. Just before I finish, I wanted to touch on the College Collaboration Fund. This is a pot of 5.4 million of competitive grant funding for all colleges, and we particularly asked for applications that address one of 5 specific quality improvement needs, which included supporting learners and staff with mental health and well-being, supporting young people to re-engage in education, and reducing the risk of NEET. We've had a really positive response from providers overall, and we're hoping to announce the successful bids soon. But just to finish and say thanks again for inviting us here today.
Thank you, Claire, for that update. Really helpful to hear the amount of work that is going on. And I think it's probably important to emphasise that I think everybody here recognises we're not in a vacuum. There's a lot of work going on. We've just got a situation of high needs. So it's to build on rather than to discount. Right, I think it's almost impossible to pin this down into a small number of things to discuss, but there are 3 areas that stand out, which I would just suggest as areas to explore in the discussion for the next 20 minutes or so. One is how well young people are set up for further education. So what happens in primary and secondary before they get there that either enables them to take advantage of all the opportunities there, or undermines them and needs to be provided for in the plan for young people in FE. That's one area. The second one is how to support them well when they are there, which has come out loud and clear. Where there's been good practice, it's made all the difference. Where support has been partial or absent, it's been catastrophic. And finally, how to help young people make good transitions back into formal learning now. We've touched on this a bit. Everyone's been out, they're going to come back in. It's the big opportunity now to think about what nature of transition they will have and how that will set them up for their future academic careers in FE. So those are the 3 areas that really strike home to me. Please show me who would like to speak. I think we've got 9 of us on the call. It's going to be slightly easier to manage it, but I'm very aware that Emma, at least you have your camera off. So flash your video on if you would like to come in, and then I'll know you're there. Who would like to address any of those points? Should we start with support in further education? Margaret.
Well, maybe I'm not the best person to start with support in further education, so maybe I'll just turn it on its head a little bit, if that's okay, and say that you know, your first point about how well we set young people up in schools for moving on to FE, and I think we've got some very here and now important issues to consider about, as you say, the return in September to school as usual, and I just think it's important to flag those into relation to these bigger questions. So the key guidance is at the moment that, you know, schooling will not be optional in September, and we understand why that is, that everybody coming back to school is important, because the key to successful outcomes, as we know from the research evidence, is about good quality teaching and having good access to that. But I think what Chloe's showed us and what Becky's articulated mean that we need to be really clear, and I say we with my hat on representing school leaders really, is that actually we need to think about the young people in the centre of this, and actually focus that expectation to return to school on what their needs tell us. So I'm just very, very mindful of the fact that, you know, full attendance in September doesn't mean full engagement, doesn't mean young people thriving. So we might get young people over the threshold, but as Chloe's described, if that doesn't mean she can engage effectively with learning, then we're not doing the right thing. So I think we have to share some guidance out there from this discussion and from other discussions about how both leaders and teachers can really support not the delivery of education, but the meeting of need in relation to learning. So, and I think that the really important points that have been articulated by this report and by Chloe are, teachers and leaders need to be curious. They need, as Dan Hughes is often quoted as saying, to be sort of research minded in relation to young people. So we need to be listening actively to Chloe and others about their experience. And when they come back in September, we need to be building on the positive. What has worked? I heard from an adopted young person yesterday who was saying that actually he'd made more friends during lockdown because he'd started a Minecraft club. Now, he's anxious about going back and losing some of those friendships because he doesn't feel as confident face to face with those relationships. So as teachers and as leaders, we need to rebuild relationships, and we need to work in partnership with parents and with multi-agency teams to make sure that we build back those relationships effectively. And I think the narrative around catch-up is quite dangerous. I'd really like to say to everybody, let's be really clear about what we mean about this. If we're making young people responsible for lost learning, then we're starting in the wrong place. What have you gained from lockdown? What can we build on? There is not a gap, there is an opportunity. And I think, what everybody has been saying here is that well-being needs to be prioritised. I would shout out from a teaching perspective that we must always do that. So it's not a quick fix of well-being, a dose of well-being in September, but it's about how do we get better teaching that actually recognises that both the relationship has to be right in order for the outcomes to be better. And finally, sorry, I've really said too much, but finally, in terms of the system, I think we have to think very carefully. Chloe's experience has shown us, like many, many people, that, that need to get a level 2, that need to get a level 4 in the exam system, that's putting hurdles and barriers in their way that shouldn't be there to their development. We should be able to celebrate the things that they can do, and we should be able to keep building on that. And Askell has written a report called The Forgotten Third, which I think really aligns to this issue, and we should champion the needs of young people who are adopted within that setting. So Chloe should be able to sort of champion what she's achieved. So I think we need to change the system. The environment needs to change. It needs to keep changing. And vulnerability needs to stay at the centre of our thinking as school leaders. I think the new framework from Ofsted could help with this, but we need to help it work in the way that we need it to. We need to build vulnerability in and make it a priority, not a periphery. So I think there are great opportunities there, but I think, it's incumbent upon us to keep making that system improve and listen more actively to Chloe and others. Thanks.
Really like that, and I particularly like the soundbite that I think we'll all now be quoting is if we make young people responsible for lost learning, we're starting in the wrong place. And that doesn't just apply for COVID transition, that applies throughout the school experience, if you take into account that listening to needs frame that you put on this. So thank you very much for that. I think that's great. Emma, you're back with us. It's lovely to see you. Let's see if we can hear you as well as see you.
Fantastic, actually. I suppose, can you hear? Is this
yes,
working?
yes, keep going. That's good.
Yes, okay. So going back to your 3 areas, I mean, in terms of how to support young people when they are back in school, I mean, from my experience working within the local authority, I think I'm just constantly finding that the adopted young people are always pushed to the bottom of the heap. It's always, the expectation that their parents will be doing everything to support them. And, it's not our responsibility, it's a parental responsibility. And that's a real barrier, I think, for, there's a barrier of expectations that, you know, that they are adopted and that everything is all right with them, and educationally their parents will sort them out.
Thank you, Emma. We could hear that. And I think you're right that whose job is it to make sure that they're okay in school is a really good question to ask. So thank you. And coming from the perspective that you have at a virtual school as well, where you're trying to bridge that gap, you'll be very well placed to see where the different tensions are. Right, I haven't got any hands at the moment, so please do raise them if you'd like. Tony, I'll come to you.
Just a very quick one. I noted when Toby was speaking, I know Lindsay's still here, when he used the phrase, and it's a phrase I've used routinely, and it made me think about it for the first time. He used the phrase, you know, that young people failing to reach their potential. And actually, that places young people responsible, doesn't it, for just in the point Margaret's just made, for reaching their potential. Actually, it's our education system's responsibility to enable people to fulfill their potential, not just young people. And it's clearly, when we listen to what Chloe said, it's our system's failure that has disabled them from fulfilling their potential. So maybe we need to stop talking about young people fulfilling their potential or being responsible somehow for fulfilling their potential. And we need to think about, are there groups of young people, you know, in various cohorts who somehow are disabled from fulfilling their potential by the way we do it? And I just wonder if this kind of, this most frantic of pauses during lockdown, you know, it's both a pause and it's full speed, but can it enable us to reflect? Yeah, really valuable thinking. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Chris, I know you said you would give us a written summary as well, which we are very keen on, so that we can share it with a wider community of adopters. But just as we keep circling back to this area, I wondered if you would like to come in now with a perspective on the provision that is there and the way that we are supporting some of these children and the opportunities that you see could be in scope as we go forward.
Yes, certainly. I mean, initially, I'd really just like to start by thanking you for inviting us to this conversation. And there's been an awful lot of incredibly useful information, which some we were aware of, but I guess that the report itself gave an awful lot of contextual information, which puts it in more quantitative context. But also, really, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Chloe for her incredibly moving and incredibly powerful talk, which I guess the report itself can give a lot of information, but I guess hearing it firsthand from somebody who's experienced this, you know, is invaluable. In terms of support, I don't know if you want me to give an update on additional support that we're currently doing, or if there's wider things you'd like to discuss around support that's in place.
It's probably more how some of the things, the areas of need that are highlighted in the report and in Chloe's account can be provided for as we go forward. I know that you're not going to have all the answers and you can't make any commitments, but just in terms of what you see as the likely areas that we could focus on to get some improvements.
I do think some of the things that have come from the report from COVID, from the current climate, may be things that can influence our consideration. I think some of the key points that were particularly important that I felt was that need for that support within the FE education itself, whether it's somebody who's personally responsible. I know up until the age of 16, maintain schools and academies have that designated teacher role, which is somebody who has that statutory duty, and obviously that's not in place, I guess, as a statutory role in FE, something which I think we, you know, again, I can't commit to anything, but you know, something which I think is particularly important. I think that's something that seems to be a common thread through most of the case studies, and certainly hearing Chloe, I guess that feeling of being lost when you enter a brand new environment. That's something which I've personally found very interesting. Something which we've been focusing a lot of our efforts recently on as well, in maintained areas, is that trauma awareness and that attachment awareness and that whole school approach. And again, it's probably something which needs to be given more focus from an FE perspective as to what can be done, not just to I guess to put that support in place, but to increase that awareness wider. You know, I said that holistic whole school approach, that, you know, so it's not just one person's responsibility for this. There were things that jumped out in particular for me for the report. Again, I'm in a difficult situation that I'd love to be able to say that we'll be able to, you know, implement all of these things, but there were certainly things that jumped out for me personally, which, again, from I'm mindful that from up to the age of 16, that, you know, a lot of measures are in place, and it's something which I'd like to see us you know, give more thought to going forward.
Thank you, Chris, and we all completely understand.
Yeah, sorry, it's quite an awkward.
As a civil servant, no, don't
yes.
feel awkward. Everyone understands it, but you have got front row seats on how the policy is being written and delivered. So we're grateful for your expertise and not holding you to anything.
Thank you.
So yes, statutory roles to support in FE to support these children and, well, young people by the time they get there. And also a recognition of the drop-off and support just at the wrong time are two areas that obviously are standout areas in the report, and it's useful to see them picked up. Ones we would be happy to support DFE colleagues to develop more thinking about if there is an opportunity to do that. I want to come to Mary because I know you've got a huge depth of knowledge and haven't yet spoken, so I just want to make sure that you get some time to give us your thoughts.
Yeah, just first of all, else, thank you so much to Becky for outlining what's a really fascinating report. I certainly learned a lot reading it. And also from Chloe about, you were so eloquent in describing your personal experiences, and I found that really moving. So at EPR, we come from more of a quantitative approach and tend to do most of our analysis using the National Pupil Database, which I think, as I'm aware, adopted children, it's slightly difficult to identify within that for external data users. So that's why I think the personal and qualitative reflections that have been evidenced in this report are so helpful to us. And the work that we do on vulnerable learners, we certainly look a lot at looked after children and children in need, and I think it would be yeah, we'd definitely call for more data availability so that we can include adopted children as a distinct category in our analysis. I think the DFE actually had some experimental statistics that have included adopted children as a separate category, and I'd be really interested to hear if Claire or Chris have any more updates on that. We'd certainly be very interested in that. But I'd also like to echo what Margaret was saying about the importance of focus on the needs of individual pupils rather than seeing it as an approach of just scaling up delivery of a service. And I think, as Chloe's reflections showed, the simple presence or attendance in school isn't enough. It needs to be a fully rounded level of well-being support, mental health support, and all too often we see that the most disadvantaged and vulnerable groups of pupils are subject to, as your report showed, higher exclusion rates, unexplained pupil exits from schools, and then all of this stems from a lack of understanding fundamentally and support of social, emotional needs, SEND and various other needs. So yeah, we'd very much echo what's been said already, and the need to, we published a catch-up plan recently, which Margaret's point about catch-up can be, I think, a term at times, but we certainly focused that plan being over the summer, and in the acknowledgement that many pupils will have gone through additional traumas, through grief, anxiety and increased deprivation during this period. So it's all the more important to focus on well-being depth before improving attainment. Yes, I know we're pushed for time, so I won't say any more, but just thank you so much for everyone's contributions.
Thank you. And I just want to just pause there because Margaret had a question which she thought you'd be able to answer around tuition post-16. Is that right, Margaret?
I was just wondering, you know, because the funding's been targeted, part of the funding for catch-up has been targeted on tuition and either small group or one-to-one. And I know that the What Works Centre did a sort of extraction of the evidence. I don't know if this group knows about that, but for looked after children, how, you know, what makes the most impact in terms of an intervention for young people who have perhaps intersectional needs of SEND and other aspects of disadvantage. And I'm just wondering whether there's any evidence of that in post-16. You know, what's the targeted support that we would consider? You know, does one-to-one tuition and small group working, targeted funding for that, is there an evidence base to show that in FE would be beneficial?
Thanks for that, Margaret. I'm perhaps not best placed on the specific question of post-16, so I come from more of a vulnerable learners background. I think certainly evidence that support for additional tuition in all stages can be incredibly effective, and I'm speculating, but I wonder whether the kind of more personalised one-to-one tuition might be quite helpful for more vulnerable student groups that, you know, typically being in a large class of 30 might be more challenging. I can certainly look into that and follow up, but I'm probably not best placed right now to make it as such.
Okay,
thank you.
Rather illustrates the point that we are at the beginning of a conversation here with this report and this discussion, and we need to keep it going. Tony's put on the chat an opportunity to do that via some research he's doing, so please do check that. And Adoption UK will continue to look for opportunities to get some of these issues discussed and to get expert input, so that we can really catalyse the debate around ensuring that adoption is truly inclusive, education is truly inclusive and gives that equal chance to the young people who did not get an equal start in life, that we use as our mantra when we're talking about these issues. We are now out of time. We could carry on for another 2 hours. You'll be delighted to hear that I won't make you. I think we can pull out some really important observations that have been made in this discussion, and I'm not going to attempt to do it now because there's too many things buzzing around my head, but I think that what we're going to do is, we've recorded the session with your permission. We'll be able to write up the areas that have stood out most from this discussion and identify the ones where we've only just started to scratch the surface of what needs to be thought through, which we'll make available to you, and we'll obviously be looking to work closely with DFE colleagues to pursue any of these opportunities that are going to come as we look at the transition and changes post-COVID. So thank you all very, very much. A particular thank you to Chloe, who's done the bravest and most difficult job out of anybody here. So thank you, Chloe, for bringing it all to life so well for us. And Mary, you've got your hand up. Is there one brilliant closing comment that you want to make?
No, sorry, that's actually a legacy from previously.
All right then. So with that, thank you all very much. Thank you, Becky, for doing this research for Adoption UK and for all our stakeholders, and to you all for coming and helping shape our discussions.